This evening, observance night, Luang Pa asked if I would give the evening reflections. Still working through a bit of foggy-minded jet lag from the trip to Thailand. But very happy to be back from what was a very good trip in many accounts, and also always nice to return to a very peaceful, cool, wintry, California wintry anyway. I think it must have been up into the 60s today, but very comfortable climate in our forest. Retreat underway. Ajahn having gotten things started for the community here, and our arrival back just to settle in and join the very peaceful pace of community and retreat. It's been very nice, very delightful. Thinking of maybe offering a few reflections from the travels in Thailand, but really kind of realized that over the past few days I've done a lot of that just in our community meetings and informal sharings with people. I'm not sure I have a whole lot more specific travel-related stories to share that haven't already been talked about, or impressions, and just the overriding one of the incredible generosity and hospitality that we've all experienced the past 5 weeks that we were there, from the lay community and from also the monastic community. Visited a number of different monasteries, and really got a first-hand experience of the being able to receive that warm welcome and offers of kindness and help. Lovely to be part of that exchange, giving as much as possible along those lines, and then being able to receive it as well. Provides for a really easeful mind in a time of travel. Sometimes traveling it's not always been my strong suit. I've never been an easy traveler. I've always kind of, maybe it's a bit of laziness, but tended to be more of the stay in one place and watch the world come in and depart from my own vantage point, rather than go out and seek it. Just maybe a personal inclination. But so challenging it can be to do some kind of traveling like that sometimes. But as time goes on, it becomes easier, particularly in a simplified life of the monk. There's not so much they have to think about in terms of packing and carrying. Things are fairly simple and often provided for at the other end as well, which makes it nice. So most of the packing and organization is figuring out how to take all the things we want to take to offer people and how to bring all the things back that we've received from people. But there's always the challenges of being in a different environment, and even though our lifestyles are very much the same from one monastery to another in our tradition, and the routines are pretty predictable, there's always some differences in wanting to make sure that we're good guests and that we do things appropriately and represent Abhayagiri and Luang Pa very well. And it's interesting to just see in traveling how really the experience, for me anyway, is not a whole lot different than what it is from in the daily life of the monastery, because my mind states and my habits and qualities that I have here at Abhayagiri seem to go with me no matter where I go, for better or for worse. I think Ajahn Chah said, just because you take ordination doesn't mean everything all of a sudden becomes rosy, or your defilements ordain with you. So they also travel with you wherever you go. They come along even though they might be considered excessive baggage. Still don't have to pay a fee for them. They still come with us on the plane. So just watching the different kind of mind states and working with them in the same way, so that we lessen our propensity to suffer when things aren't completely under our control. Just one kind of test along those lines, watching my own wish to represent the monastery well, and my training kind of spontaneously was challenged with a plane flight that I was taking on my own towards the end of the trip, when I was flying from Ubon to Bangkok on my way back up to Anandagiri Monastery for the final week to spend a bit more time with Ajahn Achalo and the community there, and to have a chance to be in the small and removed monastery for that period of time. And I found myself, I was on my own at that point. The rest of the group had gone on to central Thailand and then off to Dao Dam. And I was traveling on my own, and I don't speak practically any Thai, almost none. And I found myself sitting on the plane next to a very senior Wapapong monk, Thai monk, who spoke almost no English. And I didn't know who he was. I'd never met him before, and trying to ferret out, I didn't even know he was a Wapapong monk until we finally kind of were able to communicate a little bit, and he showed me some pictures on his iPhone of various community members, of course, the Westerners whom I recognized. And in my wish to please and to try and think of something in Thai that I could say that would be understandable and relevant, working through the few words I used, in my early travel days in Thailand, and not even sure even if I got the words that I would be understood, because of the pronunciations, I'm sure were not so easy to hear from the Western tongue, but trying to say a few cordial things, and realizing almost every time, I think because I was a little bit nervous, that I was forgetting to use the very polite forms of address that a junior, or that a monk of my panza would use with a very senior monk. In the culture, anybody who's older than yourself, or in formal situations where you would want to offer some respect, as most of you know, all of you know, a man would use the word kap at the end of any kind of phrase. A woman uses the word ka, just as a politeness. And I kept on forgetting to do that with this senior monk. And I'd catch myself, and I don't know how he was reacting, if at all, and I start to feel a little bit embarrassed because I forgot to do it. And so I'd try and think of another phrase that I could think of, just so I could remember to say the word kap at the end, to show that I was actually a very respectful person. And I'd finally get one out, and I'd say it and feel good, and then I'd say something else and forget it again. So I just kind of tripped out a little bit watching my own mind states of embarrassment. I never know how he reacted, and probably never will. But he was showing me some photos once, and every time I would recognize somebody, I'd say, "Oh, cup, cup, cup," just to try and make make myself more respectful sounding. So just watching these kinds of habits, whether you're traveling, whether you're in the monastery, just the mind habits go with one, and the training over time is just learning how to be at ease with what the conditioning that one has, and not to get so much of a sense of personal involvement with them, to realize that all of these tendencies of mind, these underlying tendencies that we live with, come from conditions, causes and conditions, and are not something we have to identify with to the point of suffering over them. Realize them, see them in their true light, and not hold on to them, not take them personally. So oftentimes these underlying tendencies, are informing our behaviors, our reactions. We kind of operate from them most of the time, for better or for worse. And probably during the retreat time, people have been here on retreat for a month or so and have seen a few of these arising, I would suspect. And just to learn how to be with them in a way that's patient and healthy as time goes on, because the process of working with these underlying emotional tendencies, the tendencies towards attraction, desire, greed, aversion, confusion, doubt, anxiety, they're deeply embedded. And it just takes a lot of time and willingness to learn to be with them in a way that is going to lead to less suffering. So oftentimes, particularly as Westerners, I think they arise, they manifest, they come into being in our consciousness in the realm of thoughts. Just the verbal capacity for most of us in the Western world is, as Ajahn Sucitto puts it, is highly overdeveloped. So our tendency to think and verbalize in our heads all of these underlying tendencies is very strong. So we often find ourselves suffering a lot with out-of-control thinking process, and nothing better than a good retreat setting with quiet and decreased interaction and decreased distraction to really get a full-on dose of experiencing the thinking process in all of its various forms. And if we engage with them, they will tend to multiply, proliferate, and depending on how we hold that, can lead to a sense of frustration, difficulty, self-questioning. And they tend to compound the more we react against them. The Buddha offers all sorts of different ways of working with these distractions. The whole path in some ways oriented towards developing enough purity of heart and enough clarity of mind to be able to see how these things come into formation and how we can respond to them in a way that doesn't compound the suffering that we can get involved with in their presence. One of the teachings that is often helpful to people in the early years, and becomes incorporated, I think, into our ways of responding in general, is the teaching on the 5 ways of removing these distracting thoughts or dealing with them. which many of you probably are familiar with, and comes across in the teaching in the sutta, the Vitakka Santana Sutta in the Majjhima, almost as kind of a formula of progression of trying one technique, and if it doesn't work, then trying the next, and so on. And I've found that whereas that's a very useful structure to learn these techniques from, that as time goes on, they tend to become a bit more automatic and come into use a bit more spontaneously and just through sheer repetition and recognition. The right approach to working with a particular mind state seems to manifest just over time through habit and experience. But it's always good to find a way to start with that if you haven't used these reflections before. And I'm just, my intent is not to go through them in excruciating detail, but to, I'll just mention them very quickly, that the first way of working with a difficult or distracting thought, like an obsession that might be involved in the sensual realm, some sort of sensual repetitive thought, or thought of irritation, aversion that keeps coming up, confusion, doubt, anxiety, the moha states of mind, and the thinking that comes on top of that, that results from those underlying states of mind, the thoughts that might occur, the perceptions as they arise, and the reactions that we have to those perceptions, and the verbal process that begins the process of papancha, proliferation, as we attend to them unwisely. Then they grow, proliferate, multiply, and cascade. That the first approach in this particular teaching is to just try a bit of thought substitution by supplanting a more skillful thought into the process. Buddha likens it to using a large peg in a board to, a small peg to drive out a larger peg, a coarser peg. So substituting something that's a bit more refined to drive out the other one, along the lines of, say, a thought of anger or irritation, trying to substitute that, drive it out in a sense, with a reflection on patience or kindness as an antidote to the particular negative thought. Or a thought of sensual desire arising and proliferating, then using a substitute like an asubha practice, or reflection on impermanence of conditions of sensuality to drive out that particular mind habit. Those are just examples of that particular technique of thought substitution. And then in the teaching, the Buddha says, well, if that doesn't work, then to maybe reflect on the downside of the particular thought, the danger of engaging in something that's going to lead you in a proliferative narrative that probably won't go anywhere. And just to reflect on that, and that if that sense of concern, conscience concern, hiriyottappa, is strong enough, then that in itself can cause the mind to turn away from the underlying quality of mind that's driving that thought. If that doesn't work, the Buddha says, well, just try turning away from it. Try not paying attention to it. Try just to ignore it, and it's like closing one's eyes, just to eliminate it from the field of experience. And then I'm going to skip the fourth one because I want to come back to it, because it's one that I find more and more useful in my life these days. But the fifth one, the last one, being when it's so persistent, particularly if it's a very, very harmful or negative train of thought, is to just suppress it. Crush mind with mind is the way he uses it. And it's a very forceful determination not to follow particularly harmful train of thought. But the fourth one is a more curious one, and I find that as I understand it or practice with it, it becomes more the basis for just dealing for myself with any of the hindrances or underlying tendencies that start to bubble up in when the defilements start to assert their strength in my practice. And it's been hard to translate, apparently. It's a bit of an obscure phrase. I can't remember exactly the Pali, but roughly translated as stilling the thought formation. And the Buddha gives a simile where he talks about like a person who's walking quickly says to himself, well, why am I walking so quickly? Why don't I walk a little bit more slowly? And so he walks more slowly. And then he says, well, why don't I just stand still instead of walking at all? So he stands still. And, well, why don't I sit down instead of walking or standing still? Or why don't I lie down instead of sitting down? So he assumes a quieter, stiller posture. And in the same way, the Buddha says, well, one can still the formation of the thought process. And various ways have been posited to interpret this. Exactly what does that mean in practice? And some by actually retracing the thoughts as they've proliferated and accumulated, tracing them back to the origin, the original thought that started it all. For me, it works better to actually see that in terms of going beneath the thought, regarding the thought itself, the verbal quality that emerges in the intellect, the actual words, going beneath that, realizing that that's a very surface manifestation of an underlying state. And moving more towards the affective experience that's feeding it. So really starting to just let the thought itself, the verbalization, settle, trying to, in a sense, drop the story and not pay so much attention to it, but rather turn the attention towards the underlying affective state. As a mental experience, as a feeling, as an emotion. And then even further, divorcing oneself from the what would be called like an interpretation or perception of a mental experience to just a bare energetic experience, of course, in the body. Which is where we can really experience the actual effect of these mental conditions in the body. And I find that as time goes on, just continuously and repetitively referring to that particular way of acknowledging and working with distracting thoughts, mental proliferations, whatever it is that's coming up, is a very effective and oftentimes very quick and immediate way of helping to recognize and relax and let go of these particular habits of mind. Kind of points to some of the qualities of appropriate and inappropriate attention. The Buddha talks about yoniso manasikara, appropriate attention, as one of the most important factors in the development of our practice. And one can see that when one has a distracting or a unskillful thinking process going on, how if you inappropriately attend to it, yoniso manasikara, then it starts to build, proliferate, and compound on itself by paying attention to the story and trying the usual ways of justification or continuing the argument in your head or justifying whatever it is that's going on through continuous mental proliferation, that attending to something like that in that way is really unskillful in terms of seeing it to its completion or to its end. And we just compound the suffering through that inappropriate attention. So we might think, well, then we really do need to just not attend to it and to suppress it, turn away from it. And in a sense, that's true, but if it's left there, then the work is only half done. And I've had, some conversations at times with people who are contemplating and understanding and practicing with how not to attend inappropriately. And so, I remember having had some conversations of, my asking, well, what do you do when this kind of thought appears? Oh, well, I just turn away from it. I just shut it out. I just, I don't allow myself to go there. And I guess my reaction or my thought to that is, well, that can be appropriate if it's a harmful, negative kind of thought, but it can't stop there because that's turning a skillful suppression into possibly a repression where you're not actually seeing it in its basic form as it starts to arise, not acknowledging the underlying tendency that is coming up with it. So in addition to that, refraining from an unskillful way of attending to this negative thinking process, I think one really has to then add the extra component of using appropriate attention to skillfully attend to some aspect of it, the underlying aspect of it. And particularly attending to the nature of dukkha. Part of Yoniso Manasikara is seeing the Four Noble Truths, really seeing an experience. This is suffering. And this has a cause to it. And not just to thinking about it, but to really experiencing it. Our duty is to understand dukkha, not just to try and move towards the Third Noble Truth of eradication, but we have to really understand it. So turning towards that underlying experience in the negative mind states is so important. And again, allowing that experience to be known as an energy manifestation. To really allow ourselves to feel the feeling. Not just discard the thinking that's supporting it, but to feel the feeling and to understand the unsatisfactory nature of it on a gut level. And that opens the door to seeing how it arises, our various attachments and cravings and wishes to movements of mind trying to get rid of the unpleasant and trying to get the pleasant, how that is the contributing factor to this fundamental dukkha. It's underlying these thoughts. The development of mindfulness immersed in the body is the teaching that we hear so much about, and the development of the kaya sankhara, the bodily formation, the in and out breathing, as the primary tool to tune into this physical experience, this energetic experience. And we've talked about in some of the readings and discussions afterwards, all the ways that mindfulness of breathing is taught, but as some have expressed in some of these morning discussions, very much my experience has been very similar especially in the early years, trying to doggedly really focus an intense attention on breathing at the tip of the nose for so long, and realizing that what was much more fruitful, discovering it on my own and then reading more about it from various teachers of this full body breathing, this immersing of the awareness within the entire body as it gently expands and relaxes, the full energetic field of simplicity of in and out breathing, and how that, when developed throughout the entire body, acts as a focal point for being able to receive all of these mental phenomena, these perceptions, these feelings, the citta sankhara, as they manifest, the patterns that we're habituated into experiencing, how we perceive the world around us, how we've categorized our experience and the feelings that go along with it, all the tendencies, the habits, the kilesa, the ways that we can move into suffering. We allow those to arise, but we allow them to be felt and experienced through this breathing, this very simple process of full body awareness, because all of these mind states will have their manifestations as a experience within the body. The breathing of the full body acts as a receptacle in a way, so that it's a way to hold and to receive all of the aspects of our mental world, for better or for worse, within the gentle container of a very simple rhythm. And it's in this rhythmic experience of full body awareness, relaxation, expansion, relaxation, that we can receive this and let them have their own life without trying to push them away. We can hold them and let them gently move out with the external, or with the exhalation, with the out breath. Just very gently, repetitively, way to hold and drain off the different perceptions and feelings that arise from our karmic tendencies. Just over and over again. And when this comes together, when the bodily experience, the energetic experience, the patterns of the mind, and then through our direction, like the vitaka vichara, the directed thought of how we bring up an object to, like the breathing, to focus on in the body, then when these three formations come together in a skillful way with right view, then we move towards a unification of our experience, unification of the mind, when the thoughts and the feelings and the receiving of them in the body, the draining of the negative energies, and the release, the relinquishment of them, all come together in a very quiet, contemplative mode of experience. And we can experience a sense of release, freedom that comes from recognizing, experiencing, letting go on this level, without the need to proliferate, compound. One of the qualities that's really important in this process, because this is not something that happens for most people overnight, or even takes many, many years of repetitive experience and commitment. So patience is very fundamental to this process. I've never been a really patient person. My mother used to tell me that all the time when I was growing up, and would always want to have something right away, if not sooner. And finally one day she just looked at me and said, "You just need to be more patient. You stop being so impatient." And I was old enough to really hear that and realize, wow, that's actually really true. And this is, it's really uncomfortable. I can actually feel the vibration of impatience just coursing through me, and I was very glad that she pointed that out, and realized that that is a quality that I have always needed to really bring my attention to, and that it serves this purpose of being able to learn over the long term, to stick with it over the long term. Patience isn't the kind of teeth-gritting, resistance to, a resistant kind of a thing. It's or a very passive, waiting until it just goes away experience. But it's a very in its fullest development, when one is able to develop it fully, it's a very mature, patient kind of response. I think Ajahn Sumedho uses, he has a very nice way of phrasing what patience is as the peaceful coexistence with the unpleasant. So we don't deny the unpleasant, we don't try and fortify ourselves and defend ourselves against it or run away from it, or turn away from it or pretend it's not there, or trying to rationalize or explain it away, but we allow ourselves to just peacefully coexist with it for as long as the experience is there. We don't have any expectation, there's no time-bound nature for it to go away. We don't try to let it go. Sometimes letting it go has this kind of sense of a little bit of annihilation. If I just do it right, then I can let it go. But more to let it be for the length of its natural life, and to be present for it, peacefully coexist until it arises, persists, and disappears in its own accord. And this quality is immeasurably important in developing our meditation practice and how we respond to these different states of mind that emerge. And when we see all of this happening over and over again and learn to more quickly respond, and this is something that really does happen, I think, over many years of practice, maybe some sooner than others who are lucky, but that it becomes more of an automatic response. It's not that these defiled mind moments don't completely stop necessarily, but the pattern that one is used to, and as it emerges, one just sees it more and more quickly. You become, because you've allowed yourself to experience it, allowed yourself to see it in a more honest, generic way, then the mind becomes more sensitized to these mind states when they do arise. If you have some experience with a peaceful mind through meditation, then they become much more apparent much sooner. So the tendency to grasp and proliferate starts to diminish little by little, and they're recognized. These mental states are recognized and known. We don't become so scared of them, fearful of them, or the unpleasant feeling, where we allow ourselves to really see them in their entirety, and then they lose their power, they lose their momentum. So it's just bit by bit, day by day, week by week, that with patience we develop these ways of not picking up and holding and responding to them in the old ways. And with that, you get the recognition of these are just patterns, conditioned patterns. And they don't really have anything to do with a true self. I don't have to take ownership of them. Causes and conditions, I need to respond to them, need to recognize them, be with them, be honest, not try and push them away, but not feed them, not encourage them, and to just be there with them for as long as they persist until they pass away on their own, then we can really pay attention to that non-arising, that cessation as they happen, and then the non-arising when they don't come back so strongly. And we can let go at that point, really let go, and relinquish, and move into a much more a state of peacefulness, true peacefulness, deep peacefulness, not manufactured peace, but through letting go. And we stop this whole becoming process around these traits one by one, little by little. We don't enter into the whole becoming process. And when we eventually do that with all of the underlying states, then we can really see the cessation of becoming. The opportunity is there to see it fully. As Sariputta says, Nibbana, the complete ending of these, Nibbana is the cessation of becoming. So I think I'll leave that for a few reflections for tonight.